The emergency call button blinked 3 times before anyone noticed. Row 28B, the cramped seat by the lavatory where a small boy sat alone, tears streaming down his face, clutching something golden in his trembling hands. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. What happens when the son of the most respected pilot in the airline industry boards a plane and nobody knows who he is? What happens when kindness meets cruelty at 35,000 feet? And what happens when a secret that could change everything remains hidden until it's almost too late? This is the story of 9-year-old Ethan Cross, a boy with dreams as vast as the sky itself, and the flight that would test everything he believed about courage, dignity, and the human spirit. Buckle up. This journey is about to take off. Ethan's bedroom looked like a museum of aviation history. Model aircraft hung from invisible fishing line, creating a frozen aerial ballet across his ceiling. A vintage propeller blade, an actual piece from a 1940s aircraft his grandfather had flown, served as a shelf for his most prized possessions. Posters covered every inch of wall space, the Concorde breaking the sound barrier, the Blue Angels in perfect formation, and his personal favorite, a silhouette of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner against a crimson sunset. But today, everything felt different. Today, the dream became real. Ethan held the silver wings in his palm, turning them slowly in the morning light streaming through his window. The junior aviator badge his father had given him last Christmas now felt heavier, more significant, because today he wasn't just pretending anymore. Nervous? The voice made Ethan spin around. Captain Vincent Cross stood in the doorway, already in his crisp Navy uniform with 4 gold stripes gleaming on his shoulders. To Ethan, his father looked like a superhero, the kind who saved lives without anyone ever knowing. A little, Ethan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. What if something goes wrong? Vincent crossed the room and knelt beside his son, his hands, the same hands that had guided countless aircraft through storms and turbulence, now gently steadying his boy's shoulders. Listen to me, Ethan. You know what separates a good pilot from a great one? Ethan shook his head. It's not the flying. Any well-trained person can fly a plane. Vincent tapped his chest. It's what's in here. It's staying calm when everyone else is panicking. It's treating every single person on that aircraft like they're the most important person in the world. It's dignity, son. You never lose your dignity, no matter what happens. Even if people are mean to me? Vincent's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Especially then, you hold your head high, you show respect, and you remember whose son you are. Not because it makes you better than anyone, but because it reminds you of who you want to be. Ethan nodded, pinning the silver wings to his jacket with newfound determination. He carefully placed his most treasured possession, a scale model of a Boeing 787, into his backpack, wrapping it in his favorite blue hoodie for protection. Ready, co-pilot? Vincent asked, standing and extending his hand. Ready, Captain, Ethan replied, gripping his father's hand with both of his own. The drive to Chicago O'Hare International Airport was filled with Ethan's endless questions, each one revealing his hunger to understand every detail of aviation. Vincent answered patiently, occasionally glancing at his son with barely concealed pride. Dad, what's the hardest part about being a pilot? Vincent considered this carefully. The responsibility. Every decision I make affects 300 people. Their safety, their comfort, their lives. That weight never gets lighter. You just get stronger at carrying it. As they pulled into the airport's passenger drop-off zone, Ethan's excitement began to battle with sudden anxiety. The terminal loomed before them, massive and intimidating, filled with thousands of strangers. Inside, the controlled chaos of the airport enveloped them. Vincent kept a protective hand on Ethan's shoulder as they navigated through security checkpoints and crowded corridors. Passengers and airport staff alike nodded respectfully at Vincent's uniform, some even stepping aside to let them pass. At gate C-47, Vincent knelt down one final time, adjusting his son's jacket and looking him directly in the eyes. This is where I have to leave you for now, but remember, I'll be up front and you'll be in the back. But we're still together. We're still a team. Understand? Yes, sir. If you need anything, you ask the flight attendants. They're trained professionals and they're there to help you. Ethan nodded, trying to mirror his father's confidence even as his heart raced. "I'll see you when we land, son. Make me proud." "I always do," Ethan replied with a small smile. Vincent ruffled his hair affectionately, then disappeared down the corridor marked crew only, his figure confident and commanding. Ethan took a deep breath and approached the gate counter, standing on his tiptoes to slide his boarding pass across the desk. The woman behind the counter barely glanced up. Her name tag read Diana Cole, Senior Flight Attendant. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features, and her expression suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. "Unaccompanied minor," she stated flatly. Not as a question, but as an inconvenient fact. Her fingers clicked across the keyboard with aggressive efficiency. "Yes, ma'am, I'm traveling to visit my grandmother in Denver. My father made sure everything—" "Stand still," Diana interrupted, attaching a bright yellow tag to Ethan's backpack with more force than necessary. The tag read, "Special handling required," in bold black letters. Ethan swallowed hard, gathering his courage. "My father is actually the pilot on this flight. Captain Cross. Maybe you know." Diana's eyes flicked up, narrowing slightly. "Look, kid, I've been doing this job for 15 years. You know how many children tell me their parent is the pilot? Or the CEO? Or a celebrity?" She leaned forward slightly. "We don't do special treatment. Everyone follows the same rules, understand?" The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. His cheeks flushed red, and he dropped his gaze to the floor. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." "Good. Wait over there until boarding begins." She dismissed him with a wave of her hand, already focused on the next passenger in line. Ethan retreated to a seat near the window, watching aircraft taxi past on the runway. He touched the silver wings on his jacket, remembering his father's words, "You never lose your dignity, no matter what happens." Behind him, a businessman in a tailored suit observed the entire interaction, his brow furrowing in disapproval. He exchanged a meaningful glance with an elderly woman seated nearby, who shook her head slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line of disappointment. The intercom crackled to life. "Flight 237 to Denver is now boarding all passengers. Please have your boarding passes ready." Ethan gathered his backpack and joined the line, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and dread. As he stepped through the jet bridge, the familiar smell of aircraft cabin, a mix of recycled air, coffee, and jet fuel, filled his nostrils. Despite everything, he couldn't suppress a small smile. This was it, his first solo flight. The cabin opened before him like a portal to his dreams. Ethan's eyes traced every detail: the overhead compartments, the emergency exit signs, the way sunlight streamed through the windows, creating geometric patterns on the seats. He located his assigned seat, 12A, a window seat his father had specifically chosen so Ethan could watch the wing and engines during takeoff. But before he could reach it, a sharp voice cut through his wonder. "Where do you think you're going?" Diana stood in the aisle, her arms crossed, blocking his path. "My seat is 12A, Ethan replied quietly, holding up his boarding pass. "Not anymore. Unaccompanied minors sit in the back. It's airline policy. You should have been informed of this." "But my father said—" "I don't care what anyone said. You're sitting in 28B. Move." Ethan felt every eye in the cabin turn toward him. The shame burned through his chest as he retreated down the aisle, past rows of passengers who either looked away uncomfortably or watched with growing concern. Seat 28B was everything he'd feared. Crammed against the lavatory wall, the constant sound of the bathroom door opening and closing filled the tiny space. His view was almost completely blocked by the aircraft's structure. Worst of all, the smell of disinfectant mixed with other less pleasant odors created an almost nauseating atmosphere. Ethan sank into the seat, fighting back tears. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't the adventure his father had promised. But then he remembered, you never lose your dignity. He carefully removed his model airplane from his backpack, setting it gently on the tray table. Looking at it, he tried to imagine his father in the cockpit, going through pre-flight checks, unaware of his son's situation just 100 feet behind him. "Stay strong," Ethan told himself. "Make Dad proud." But as the engines began to roar to life, and the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this flight was going to test him in ways he never expected, and he had no idea just how right he was. The aircraft climbed steadily through scattered clouds, sunlight flickering through the windows in rhythmic patterns. Most passengers had settled into their flights, laptops open, headphones in, books spread across tray tables. But in seat 28B, Ethan sat rigidly upright, acutely aware of every sound, every movement, every disapproving glance from Diana as she passed by. He'd taken out his sketchbook, a worn notebook filled with detailed drawings of aircraft from every angle. Drawing calmed him, helped him focus. He carefully began sketching the wing visible through his partially obstructed window, his pencil moving in confident strokes despite his shaking hands. Across the aisle, an elderly man with weathered hands and kind eyes watched the young boy work. His name was Robert Hayes, though everyone called him Professor, a title earned from 40 years teaching aeronautical engineering at MIT. He'd seen countless brilliant young minds in his career, but something about this solitary child drawing with such intensity captured his attention. "You've got a steady hand there, young man," Professor Hayes said gently, leaning slightly across the aisle. Ethan looked up, surprised and pleased. "Thank you, sir. I'm trying to get the wing flaps right. They're angled differently during cruise than during takeoff." The professor's eyebrows rose. "You know about wing flap configurations?" "My dad teaches me everything about flying. He's—" Ethan caught himself, remembering Diana's dismissive response. "He's a pilot." "Is he now?" The professor's eyes twinkled with interest. "And what airline does he fly for?" Before Ethan could answer, Diana's sharp voice cut through their conversation like a blade. "Excuse me, young man. This is an arts and crafts hour." Ethan looked up to find Diana standing over him, her expression stern. She pointed at his pencil shavings, barely visible specks on the tray table. "You're making a mess. Put that away, now." "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't need explanations. I need compliance. Put it away." The entire section of the cabin had gone quiet. Passengers who moments ago were absorbed in their own activities now watched with varying degrees of discomfort and disapproval. Ethan's hands trembled as he closed his sketchbook and gathered his pencils. "Yes, ma'am." As Diana walked away, Professor Hayes leaned forward again, his voice low but firm. "That was completely uncalled for. You weren't doing anything wrong, son." Ethan's throat felt tight. "It's okay. She's just doing her job. There's doing your job, and then there's—" The professor trailed off, shaking his head. "What's your name, young man?" "Ethan. Ethan Cross." "Well, Ethan Cross, I'm Professor Hayes, and I want you to know something important." He waited until Ethan met his eyes. "The way someone treats you says everything about them and nothing about you. Remember that." A few rows ahead, a young mother named Patricia Chen had been watching the interaction while trying to soothe her fussy toddler, Sophie. She exchanged a meaningful look with her husband, David, who was grinding his teeth in barely suppressed anger. "Did you see that?" Patricia whispered. "She's targeting that little boy." "I saw it," David replied quietly. "And if it happens again, I'm saying something. I don't care if it makes the rest of the flight awkward." The aircraft hit a patch of turbulence, causing drinks to slosh and overhead compartments to rattle. Diana's voice came over the intercom, her tone professional but cold. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light chop. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Ethan gripped his armrests, remembering his father's explanations about turbulence. "It's just the aircraft moving through different air densities, son. Nothing to worry about. The plane is designed to handle far worse." But knowing the science didn't make his stomach settle any faster. "First time flying?" Professor Hayes asked gently. "First time alone," Ethan corrected. "I've flown before, but always with my parents." "Ah, that's a big step. You must be pretty brave." Ethan wanted to feel brave, but right now he mostly felt small and very, very alone. The turbulence subsided, and Diana began making her way through the cabin with the beverage cart. Ethan watched as she smiled warmly at passengers in first class and business class, chatting pleasantly, taking her time with their requests. But as she reached the back of the aircraft, her demeanor shifted. "Drink?" She asked Ethan without looking at him. Yes, please. Could I have apple juice? Diana poured the juice with obvious impatience, and rather than handing it to him carefully, she set it down on his tray table with enough force that liquid sloshed over the rim and onto his sketchbook. Ethan gasped, quickly lifting the notebook as juice dripped off the edges. Several of his drawings were already bleeding, the ink running in watercolor streaks across the carefully rendered aircraft. Oh no, he whispered, trying to blot the juice with a napkin. Diana had already moved on without a word of apology. Professor Hayes had seen everything. His weathered hands clenched into fists, and he pressed the call button above his seat with deliberate force. When Diana returned, her expression was already defensive. Yes? I'd like to speak to the senior crew member on this flight, the professor said, his voice controlled but carrying an edge of steel. There's been an incident I believe needs to be addressed. I am the senior flight attendant on duty, Diana replied, her chin lifted. If you have a complaint— Oh, I have several, Professor Hayes interrupted quietly. But we can start with the fact that you just spilled a drink on this young man's belongings and walked away without so much as an acknowledgement. I didn't spill anything. The cup was placed on the tray table. What happens after that isn't my responsibility. I watched you set it down, with far more force than necessary. Diana's face flushed. Are you suggesting I deliberately— I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating what I observed. The tension was thick enough to cut. Other passengers were now openly watching, some nodding in agreement with the professor, others looking uncomfortable with the confrontation. Finally, Diana's voice turned icy. Sir, if you continue to be disruptive, I'll have no choice but to report this incident to the captain. I'm sure neither of us wants to involve him in a petty dispute over a spilled beverage. Professor Hayes's eyes narrowed. Funny you should mention the captain, because I have a feeling he'd be very interested in knowing how his crew treats passengers. Diana's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been uncertainty, but she quickly recovered, turning on her heel and walking away without another word. Ethan sat frozen, torn between gratitude that someone had stood up for him and horror that he'd caused such a scene. Professor Hayes, you didn't have to. Yes, I did, the old man said firmly. And you don't owe me any thanks. You didn't do anything wrong, Ethan. Remember that. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, despite everyone's reassurances, this was all his fault. The flight continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Passengers who had witnessed the interactions began to watch Diana more carefully, noting every sharp word, every dismissive gesture. And they noticed something else too. Her behavior toward Ethan seemed personal in a way that went beyond simple rudeness. In seat 15C, a businessman named Marcus Washington, who flew this route weekly for his consulting firm, had been observing everything. He pulled out his phone and opened a note-taking app, beginning to document every interaction he'd witnessed. Time 2:47 p.m., flight attendant. D. Cole spilled beverage on unaccompanied miner's belongings, no apology offered. Time 2:15 p.m., same flight attendant forced miner to move from assigned window seat to back row, near lavatory, citing policy that other passengers confirm was not standard. Time 1:45 p.m., gate agent, same person as flight attendant, dismissed miner's polite statement that his father was the pilot, accused him of lying to seek special treatment. Marcus had a daughter about Ethan's age. The thought of her being treated this way made his blood boil. 3 rows behind Ethan, an elderly woman named Beatrice Romano was having similar thoughts. She'd been a teacher for 45 years, and she recognized cruelty when she saw it, especially the kind directed at children who were too polite, too well-raised to defend themselves effectively. As the flight progressed, something remarkable began to happen. Without any formal organization or discussion, the passengers around Ethan began forming an invisible protective circle. They started watching out for him, noting every interaction, ready to intervene if necessary. Ethan, focused on salvaging what he could of his drawings, remained unaware of the growing alliance forming around him. He carefully peeled apart the pages of his sketchbook, laying them flat on the tray table to dry. Suddenly, the aircraft hit another patch of turbulence, more severe this time. The seatbelt sign dinged urgently, and several overhead compartments popped open, spilling bags into the aisle. In the chaos, Ethan's model airplane, his most prized possession, rolled off his tray table and tumbled into the aisle. No! Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt instinctively, reaching for the model. Sit down! Diana's voice was sharp as she grabbed his shoulder roughly, pushing him back into his seat. What did I tell you about following rules? My airplane, it's going to get crushed. I don't care if it's made of gold. You stay in your seat during turbulence. Do you understand me? Tears pricked Ethan's eyes as he watched his model airplane roll further down the aisle with each bump of turbulence. That airplane wasn't just a toy. It was a gift from his father on the day Ethan had said he wanted to be a pilot. It represented everything he dreamed of becoming. Professor Hayes saw the desperation in the boy's eyes. Despite the turbulence, despite the risks, despite Diana's warning, the elderly professor unbuckled his own seatbelt and carefully stood, steadying himself against the seats. Professor Hayes, please sit down, Diana commanded. But Hayes ignored her, making his way carefully down the aisle. He retrieved the model airplane, examining it quickly to ensure it wasn't damaged, then returned to Ethan's seat and pressed it gently into the boy's trembling hands. I believe this belongs to you, he said softly. Ethan clutched the airplane to his chest, tears now streaming freely down his face. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you so much. Diana appeared above them, her face flushed with anger. Sir, you directly violated a federal regulation. I'm required to report this to the captain, and you could face serious consequences. Then report it, Hayes said calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. I'm sure Captain Cross will be very interested to hear the full story. At the mention of the captain's name, Diana's expression shifted. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Concern? She opened her mouth, closed it, then walked away without another word. Patricia Chen, watching from her seat with Sophie, now sleeping peacefully in her arms, leaned toward her husband. David, something's wrong here. This is more than just a difficult employee. She's targeting that child. David nodded grimly. I noticed. And when we land, I'm filing a formal complaint. This isn't okay. Around them, other passengers were reaching similar conclusions. Whispered conversations spread through the cabin like ripples in a pond. Even those who hadn't directly witnessed the interactions were now aware that something disturbing was happening. In his cramped seat by the lavatory, Ethan held his model airplane tightly, trying to be invisible, trying not to cause any more trouble. He touched the silver wings on his jacket, the ones his father had pinned there with such pride, and wondered if he deserved to wear them. You never lose your dignity, his father's voice echoed in his memory. But what about when someone's trying to take it from you? What do you do then? Ethan didn't have an answer. He only knew that this flight, the one he'd been so excited about, had become something he just wanted to survive. He had no idea that in the cockpit, his father was about to receive a message that would change everything. And Diana had no idea that her actions were about to catch up with her in ways she never imagined. The real turbulence was just beginning. Mile 28,000 feet above Colorado, co-pilot Jennifer Torres glanced at her captain with concern. Vincent Cross had been unusually quiet for the past 30 minutes, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the controls with more tension than the smooth flight required. Everything okay, Captain? Jennifer asked carefully. She'd flown with Vincent dozens of times and had never seen him this unsettled. Just thinking about my son, Vincent replied without taking his eyes off the horizon. His first solo flight. I keep wondering if I should have kept him up here with me instead of having him experience it as a passenger. Jennifer smiled warmly. He'll be fine. It's good for him to see what it's like for everyone else. Builds character. Vincent nodded, but the tightness in his chest didn't ease. What neither pilot knew was that their head flight attendant, Diana Cole, had just made a decision that would expose something she'd hidden for years. Back in the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable to actively hostile, not toward Ethan, but toward Diana. It started when an elderly woman 3 rows up needed help with her seatbelt. Her arthritis made her fingers stiff and uncooperative. Excuse me, miss, Beatrice Romano called out weakly, struggling with the buckle. Diana glanced over, saw the issue, and said flatly, I'll be there in a moment. I'm in the middle of service. but she didn't return. She finished serving the entire beverage cart before finally making her way back to Beatrice's seat. By then, Ethan had noticed the elderly woman's struggle. Remembering his father's words about treating every passenger like the most important person in the world, he quietly unbuckled his own seatbelt and made his way to her row. "May I help you, ma'am?" Ethan asked politely, his voice still carrying traces of tears from the earlier incident. Beatrice looked up, her lined face softening with gratitude. "Oh, you sweet boy. Yes, please. These old fingers just don't work like they used to." Ethan carefully took the two ends of the seatbelt and clicked them together, then adjusted the strap to ensure it was snug but comfortable. "There you go, ma'am. Is that okay?" "Perfect. Thank you so much." Beatrice reached out and patted his hand. "What's your name, young man?" "Ethan Cross, ma'am." "Well, Ethan Cross, you have better manners than most adults I meet. Your parents raised you right." Ethan felt a small warmth spread through his chest, the first positive feeling he'd experienced since boarding. But then Diana's voice cut through the moment like ice water. "What do you think you're doing out of your seat?" Ethan turned, his face immediately flushing. "I was just helping. Did I give you permission to walk around the cabin?" "No, ma'am, but she needed—" "I don't care what she needed. That's my job, not yours." Diana grabbed Ethan's arm, not gently, and pulled him back toward his seat. "You stay seated unless you're using the lavatory. Do you understand me?" Several things happened simultaneously. Professor Hayes stood up. "You do not put your hands on that child." Marcus Washington, the businessman, was already on his feet, his phone out, recording. "I have video evidence of you physically grabbing a minor who was providing assistance to a passenger in need." Patricia Chen stood as well, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "I'm a pediatric nurse, and I'm telling you right now, you do not touch children that way. Ever." Diana's face went from red to white. She released Ethan's arm immediately, but the damage was done. At least a dozen passengers were now standing, their faces reflecting shock, anger, and something more. A unified determination that this had gone too far. "Everyone needs to return to their seats immediately," Diana said, her voice higher than before, losing its authoritative edge. "You're violating federal regulations." "No," Professor Hayes said quietly. "You are. You've been violating them since this flight began, and we're all witnesses." Diana's hands trembled. She looked around the cabin, seeing for the first time the wall of opposition she'd created. Every face was turned toward her. Every expression was judgmental. I'm going to report this entire section to the captain," she stammered. "All of you will face consequences." "Good," Marcus said firmly. "Please do report to the captain. In fact, I insist on it. I believe Captain Cross will be very interested to hear what's been happening in his cabin." At the mention of the captain's name, combined with Ethan's last name, which several passengers had just heard, a visible wave of realization swept through the cabin. "Wait," Beatrice said slowly, looking from Ethan to Diana. "Cross. This boy's last name is Cross, and the captain's name is—" "Vincent Cross," Patricia finished, her eyes widening. "Oh my God, this is the captain's son." The color drained completely from Diana's face. Ethan, standing in the aisle surrounded by protective adults, looked confused. "I tried to tell her that at the gate. I tried to tell her my dad was the pilot." Professor Hayes turned to Diana, his voice now carrying the weight of moral authority honed over decades of teaching. "You didn't just dismiss a passenger. You dismissed him. You told him he was lying when he was telling you the truth. And then you've spent this entire flight making sure he knew how little you thought of him." Diana's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Marcus stepped forward, his businessman's persona giving way to something more paternal and protective. "Here's what's going to happen. We're all going to document exactly what we witnessed on this flight. Times, behaviors, specific incidents. And when we land, we're going to provide it directly to Captain Cross, to the airline, and if necessary, to the FAA. "You're all overreacting," Diana said weakly, but even she seemed to know the words carried no weight. "Am I?" Patricia challenged. "Because from where I sit, you've been psychologically abusing a 9-year-old boy for 2 hours. If someone did that to my daughter, I'd want them never to work with children again. Ever." The cabin had gone completely silent except for the ambient hum of the engines. Even passengers in distant rows who hadn't directly witnessed the incidents had stopped their activities to listen. Diana looked at Ethan, really looked at him for the first time. She saw the silver wings on his jacket, identical to the ones his father wore, just smaller. She saw his rumpled clothes from being manhandled. She saw the juice stains on his sketchbook, the tear tracks on his face, and the way he held that model airplane like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. And she saw something else, her own reflection in how she treated this child. And she didn't like what she saw. Diana's voice cracked. She straightened her uniform with shaking hands. Excuse me. She turned and walked quickly toward the rear galley, disappearing behind the curtain. For a moment, no one moved. Then Professor Hayes gently guided Ethan back to his seat. You okay, son? Ethan nodded, but he wasn't okay. His mind was spinning, trying to process everything that had just happened. Beatrice called out from her seat. Ethan, honey, would you like to come sit with me? I have an empty seat next to me, and it's got a much better view than where you are now. Before Ethan could answer, Patricia chimed in. Or you could sit with us. Sophie loves making new friends, and we have snacks. Marcus added, I've got some drawing paper if you want to work on your sketches. Clean, dry paper. Ethan felt overwhelmed by the sudden wave of kindness. Tears threatened again, but this time they were different. Not tears of hurt, but of relief and gratitude. Thank you, he said quietly. Thank you all so much, but I think I should stay here. My dad said to stay in my assigned seat unless the crew moved me. Your dad also said crew would take care of you, Professor Hayes said gently. And we're all crew now. Every passenger on this plane is looking out for you. In the rear galley, Diana stood with her hands braced against the counter, her head down, her breathing ragged. She could hear the muffled voices from the cabin, voices united against her. How had it come to this? She'd been a flight attendant for 15 years. She'd prided herself on her professionalism, her attention to detail, her unwavering adherence to regulations. But somewhere along the way, the job had stopped being about service and started being about control. When had she become so cold? The galley curtain rustled and Jennifer Torres, the co-pilot, stepped through. She'd been alerted by another flight attendant about a situation in the cabin. Diana, what's going on back here? I've got passengers requesting to speak with the captain, and someone mentioned an incident with an unaccompanied minor. Diana looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. It's Captain Cross's son. Jennifer's expression shifted from concern to alarm. Ethan, is he okay? Is something wrong? He's fine, physically. Diana's voice dropped to barely a whisper. But I didn't know. He told me at the gate that his father was the pilot, and I didn't believe him. I thought he was just another kid trying to get special treatment. So you've been treating the captain's son like... Jennifer trailed off, her eyes widening as pieces fell into place. Diana, what did you do? I moved him from his assigned seat to the back. I was short with him. She couldn't finish. Jennifer's jaw clenched. Does Vincent know? Not yet. He needs to know. Now. Jennifer turned toward the cockpit, but Diana's voice stopped her. Wait, please. Diana's voice was desperate. Can I try to fix this first? I need to apologize to him. I need him to know I didn't mean... Didn't mean what, Diana? Jennifer's voice was harder than Diana had ever heard it. You didn't mean to abuse your authority? You didn't mean to bully a child? I've flown with you for years and I've never seen you like this. I know. Diana covered her face with her hands. My daughter. She's the same age as that boy. And she's been asking to fly alone, to visit her grandmother. And I keep saying no because I'm terrified something will happen to her. And when I saw him standing there, so confident, so sure of himself, I don't know, something in me just snapped. Jennifer's expression softened slightly, but only slightly. That's not an excuse, Diana. That's not even close to an excuse. I know, but please, let me apologize to him before you tell the captain. He deserves to hear it from me. Jennifer considered this, then nodded reluctantly. You have 5 minutes. And Diana, it better be the most sincere apology of your life. because after this, you're done on this flight, and probably a lot more. When Diana emerged from the galley, she found the cabin transformed into something resembling a protective fortress around Ethan. Passengers who had been strangers an hour ago were now united in their vigilance. She walked slowly down the aisle, feeling every eye on her. When she reached Ethan's seat, she knelt down in the aisle, an almost unprecedented gesture for a senior flight attendant. "Ethan," she began, and her voice was different now, softer, human. "I need to say something to you, and I need you to know that I mean every word." Ethan looked at her warily, clutching his model airplane a little tighter. "I was wrong," Diana continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong about everything. You told me the truth at the gate, and I didn't believe you. Worse than that, I dismissed you. I treated you like you were lying, like you didn't matter. And then I spent this entire flight making sure you felt small and unwelcome." Professor Hayes, standing protectively nearby, watched her carefully. The other passengers remained silent, but their presence was palpable, a jury weighing every word. "There's no excuse for what I did," Diana said, tears now streaming down her face. "You were polite. You were respectful. You were everything a flight attendant could hope for in a passenger, and I repaid that with cruelty. I'm so sorry." Ethan's lower lip trembled. "Why?" he asked, his voice small. "Why were you so mean to me? What did I do wrong?" The question hit Diana like a physical blow. "You didn't do anything wrong, nothing. This was all about me and my own issues. My own daughter wants to fly alone, and I'm too scared to let her. When I saw you so brave, so confident, I think part of me resented it. And that's horrible. That's unforgivable." She reached out as if to touch his hand, then thought better of it, pulling back. "You deserve better than what I gave you today. Your father would be ashamed of how I treated you. And honestly, I'm ashamed too." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing. Finally, he said softly, "My dad always says everyone deserves forgiveness if they're really sorry." Diana's breath caught. "Your dad sounds like a wise man." "He is." Ethan's voice grew stronger. "He's the best pilot in the world, and he's going to be really disappointed when he finds out what happened." "I know," Diana whispered, "and he should be. I'll accept whatever consequences come from this. But I needed you to know, none of this was your fault. You are a remarkable young man, Ethan Cross. Don't let what I did make you think otherwise." Beatrice Romano spoke up from her seat, her voice gentle but firm. "Actions speak louder than words, dear. What are you going to do to make this right?" Diana stood up, wiping her eyes, and looked around the cabin at all the faces watching her. "I'm going to tell Captain Cross exactly what happened. No excuses, no justifications, just the truth. And then I'm going to accept whatever comes next." Marcus Washington nodded slowly. "That's a start, but I still want it documented. All of us who witnessed this deserve to have our accounts heard." "I understand," Diana said, "and I won't fight it. I can't." She looked back at Ethan one more time. "I hope someday you can forgive me, but I'll understand if you don't." With that, she turned and walked toward the cockpit, her shoulders heavy with the weight of what she was about to do. Vincent Cross was reviewing the flight plan for their descent into Denver when Jennifer Torres returned to the cockpit. Her expression made his stomach drop. "Vincent, we need to talk. It's about Ethan." Every muscle in Vincent's body tensed. "What happened? Is he hurt?" "Physically, no. But," Jennifer took a deep breath, "there's been a situation with Diana. She's on her way up here to explain, but I thought you should hear it from me first." Before Jennifer could continue, the cockpit door opened and Diana entered. Her face was blotchy from crying, her usual composure completely shattered. Vincent turned in his seat, and the moment his eyes met Diana's, he knew. He knew something terrible had happened to his son, and he knew she was responsible. "Start talking," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "and I want every detail." Diana did. She told him everything, from the gate interaction to moving Ethan's seat, from the spilled juice to the dismissive comments, from physically grabbing him to the final confrontation with the passengers. She held nothing back, even when it was clear how damning each revelation was. Vincent listened in absolute silence, his hands gripping the armrests of his seat so tightly his knuckles turned white. Jennifer watched him carefully, ready to take control if necessary. When Diana finished, the silence in the cockpit was suffocating. Finally, Vincent spoke, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the force of a thunderstorm. "You touched my son. Captain, you touched my son." Vincent stood, and despite the confined space of the cockpit, he seemed to fill it entirely. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any concept of the line you crossed?" "I'm sorry," Diana sobbed. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it." Vincent's voice rose for the first time, raw emotion breaking through his professional facade. "My son idolizes flight attendants. He watches you all work and thinks you're heroes, people who keep passengers safe and comfortable. He trusts you implicitly because I taught him to. And you broke that trust. You abused your authority. You made his first solo flight a nightmare." Jennifer placed a hand on Vincent's shoulder. "Vincent, I need you to take a breath. We still have a plane to land." Vincent closed his eyes, visibly fighting for control. When he opened them again, the fury was still there, but it was cold now, calculating. "Diana, you're relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. You will remain in the rear galley until we land. You will not interact with passengers, especially not my son. Jennifer, please have another flight attendant take over her responsibilities." "Yes, Captain," Jennifer said quietly. "And Diana," Vincent added as she turned to leave, "the moment we land, you're to report directly to the chief flight attendant. I'll be filing a full report, and so will every passenger who witnessed your behavior. Your career is over. Do you understand that?" Diana nodded, unable to speak. "Get out of my cockpit." After she left, Vincent sank back into his seat, his hands shaking. Jennifer gave him a moment before speaking. "Do you need me to take the landing?" "No," Vincent said firmly. "I'm landing this plane. I'm seeing this flight through to the end. And then I'm going back there to get my son." "For what it's worth," Jennifer said quietly, "from what I heard from other attendants, Ethan handled himself incredibly well. You should be proud." Vincent's eyes welled up, but he blinked the tears away. "I am proud, and I'm furious. And I feel like I failed him by not being there." "You didn't fail him, Vincent. You taught him how to conduct himself with dignity. That's exactly what he did. Even when an adult was being cruel to him, he remained polite and respectful. That's your legacy showing through." Vincent nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He turned his attention back to the controls, channeling all his emotion into the precision required for a perfect landing. Because he owed his son that much at least. A smooth landing at the end of a terrible flight. Back in the cabin, word had spread quickly about Diana's removal from duty. Passengers buzzed with speculation, but around Ethan, a protective silence had formed. Professor Hayes had moved to the seat across from him, keeping watch. Beatrice had brought him cookies from her carry-on. Patricia had given him paper and colored pencils to replace his ruined sketchbook. Marcus had shown him pictures of his own daughter, making him feel less alone. "My dad's going to be so mad," Ethan said quietly, working on a new sketch. "Probably," Professor Hayes agreed, "but not at you. You did everything right, Ethan. Remember that. Will she really lose her job? Most likely. What she did was serious. Very serious." Ethan thought about this, his pencil pausing over the paper. "I don't want her to lose her job. I just wanted her to be nice to me." Beatrice leaned forward from her seat. "Oh, honey, your kindness is showing, but sometimes consequences are necessary to prevent the same thing from happening to someone else. Imagine if the next child she treats this way doesn't have a plane full of people ready to stand up for them. Plus," Marcus added gently, "she put her hands on you. That's not okay. Ever. You're 9 years old. Adults have a responsibility to protect children, not hurt them." The captain's voice came over the intercom, strong and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Cross. We're beginning our descent into Denver International Airport. The weather is clear, temperature is 72 degrees, and we should have you on the ground in about 15 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." Ethan's heart leaped at the sound of his father's voice. 15 minutes until he could see him. 15 minutes until he was safe. As the plane descended, Ethan pressed his face against a small window, watching the ground rise up to meet them. He saw the sprawling city, the mountains in the distance, and finally the runway approaching. The landing was flawless, so smooth that some passengers actually applauded. Vincent had poured every ounce of his skill into making it perfect, a silent apology to his son for not protecting him. As the plane taxied to the gate, the head flight attendant, an older woman named Christine, who had taken over for Diana, made an unexpected announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, before we reach the gate, I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone special on this flight. Ethan Cross, could you please stand up? Ethan's eyes widened in surprise and embarrassment as heads turned to look at him. Ethan is 9 years old and this was his first solo flight, Christine continued, her voice warm. And despite some challenges during the journey, he conducted himself with extraordinary grace, kindness, and maturity. He helped fellow passengers, remained respectful even when faced with disrespect, and represented what it means to be a true gentleman. Ethan, your father, our captain, has every reason to be proud of you. Let's give him a hand. The cabin erupted in applause. Passengers who had witnessed his ordeal clapped the loudest, some with tears in their eyes. Ethan's face burned red, but he managed a small wave, overwhelmed by the unexpected recognition. When the plane finally stopped at the gate and the seatbelt sign dinged off, something unprecedented happened. Instead of the usual rush to grab bags and crowd the aisles, passengers remained seated, waiting. Go ahead, Ethan, Professor Hayes said with a smile. You go first. You've earned it. One by one, as Ethan made his way down the aisle, passengers reached out to shake his hand, pat his shoulder, or whisper words of encouragement. You're going to be an amazing pilot someday. Your father is lucky to have such a brave son. Don't ever lose that kindness, young man. My son is your age. I hope he grows up to be like you. Tears streamed down Ethan's face, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. All the hurt from earlier seemed to dissolve under the wave of genuine human connection. As he reached the front of the plane, Christine was waiting by the door with a special pair of pilot wings. Real ones, not junior ones. From all of us, she said softly, pinning them next to his junior wings. You flew this journey like a true aviator. Then she opened the door and there, standing in the jet bridge, was Vincent Cross. Father and son locked eyes and the rest of the world fell away. Ethan ran. Vincent caught him, sweeping him up in his arms despite the boy's size, holding him as tightly as he'd wanted to since the moment Jennifer had told him what happened. I'm sorry, Vincent whispered into his son's hair. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. You were, Ethan said, his voice muffled against his father's uniform. You were in my head the whole time. You told me to keep my dignity, and I did. I tried so hard, Dad. You did more than try. You succeeded. Vincent pulled back just enough to look at his son's face, wiping away tears with his thumbs. I am so incredibly proud of you. Behind them, passengers were beginning to disembark, many stopping to shake Vincent's hand or offer words about Ethan's conduct. Marcus Washington approached with his phone. Captain Cross, I documented everything that happened. Timestamps, videos, witness accounts. I'll be sending it all to your airline's management, but I wanted you to have a copy first. Vincent nodded gratefully. Thank you. For that and for looking out for my son. No thanks necessary. He's a remarkable kid. You should know, at least 24 passengers are planning to file commendations for him and complaints about the situation. Professor Hayes was the last to deplane. He stopped in front of Vincent and Ethan, his weathered face creased in a warm smile. Your boy has the heart of a true aviator, Captain, not because he can identify aircraft or recite technical specifications, though he can do both impressively, but because he understands what it means to serve others, to maintain composure under pressure, and to lead with kindness. Those are the qualities that make a great pilot. He turned to Ethan. I taught aeronautical engineering at MIT for 40 years. When you're ready for college, you look me up. I'd be honored to write you a recommendation. He pressed a business card into Ethan's hand, then walked away, leaving the boy staring at the card in wonder. 2 hours later, Ethan and Vincent sat in a quiet corner of the airport, sharing a meal and finally having the chance to process everything that had happened. "Are you going to get Diana fired?" Ethan asked, picking at his French fries. Vincent sighed. "I'm going to let the investigation process play out. But yes, there will be serious consequences for her actions. What she did was unacceptable on every level. She apologized. She cried. I know. And maybe she's genuinely sorry. But being sorry doesn't erase the harm caused, Ethan. You understand that, right?" Ethan nodded slowly. Professor Hayes said something similar. He said consequences prevent the same thing from happening to someone else. Exactly. What if the next child she treats that way doesn't have a plane full of people ready to defend them? What if that child doesn't have your strength and self-control? Is it weird that I feel bad for her? Vincent's expression softened. No, son. That's called empathy. It's one of your best qualities. But empathy doesn't mean accepting abuse. You can feel bad about someone's situation while still acknowledging that they did something wrong and need to face consequences. They ate in silence for a moment before Vincent spoke again. Your grandmother called. She was worried when she heard about the delay in you arriving. I told her everything was fine, that we'd see her tomorrow instead. I thought maybe you and I could have a night together in Denver. What do you say? Ethan's face brightened. Really? Just us? Just us. There's a fantastic aviation museum here, and I know a great pizza place near our hotel. We can order room service dessert and watch movies. Sound good? Sounds perfect. As they finished their meal, Vincent's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then showed the screen to Ethan. Look at this. It was an email from the airline's CEO, marked urgent. The subject line read, "Regarding Flight 237, immediate investigation launched." They're taking it seriously, Vincent said. The passenger complaints started coming in before we even finished deplaning. Good, Ethan said quietly. Then with more strength, good, because maybe this means the next kid who flies alone won't have to go through what I did. Vincent looked at his son, seeing not just the 9-year-old boy who loved airplanes, but a young man developing a sense of justice and fairness that would serve him well throughout his life. 3 weeks later, Ethan received a package at his home. Inside was a letter on official airline letterhead. Dear Ethan, on behalf of Pacific Skyways Airlines, I want to personally apologize for your experience on Flight 237. The treatment you received fell far below our standards and values. After a thorough investigation involving passenger testimonies, crew statements, and video evidence, we have taken significant corrective actions. The employee in question is no longer with our company. Additionally, we have implemented new training protocols for all staff regarding the treatment of unaccompanied minors and the proper use of authority. Your grace, maturity, and kindness throughout a difficult situation exemplified the best of humanity. You turned what could have been a story of cruelty into a demonstration of courage and dignity. Enclosed, please find lifetime elite status on Pacific Skyways for you and your immediate family. A restored and professionally framed copy of the airplane sketch that was damaged during your flight. An invitation to visit our corporate headquarters and flight training center. Letters of commendation from 47 passengers who witnessed your conduct. We hope you will give us another opportunity to show you what Pacific Skyways truly stands for. Clear skies. Jonathan Wheeler, CEO, Pacific Skyways Airlines. Ethan read the letter twice, then carefully unfolded the restored sketch. The airline's art restoration team had worked miracles, not only repairing the water damage, but mounting it on museum-quality board with a brass plaque that read, "The Courage to Fly, Ethan Cross, age 9. The stack of passenger letters was even more overwhelming. Professor Hayes had written 3 full pages about dignity and character. Beatrice Romano had sent a letter written in flowing cursive about kindness. Patricia Chen had included a photo of her daughter Sophie holding a sign that said, "Thank you for helping my mommy see what kindness looks like." But the letter that made Ethan cry was from Diana herself. Dear Ethan, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to write it anyway. Losing my job was the consequence I deserved. But the real consequence, the one that will stay with me forever, is knowing that I caused pain to a child who deserved only kindness. I've spent the last 3 weeks in therapy trying to understand why I acted the way I did. I've learned that hurt people, and I was carrying around so much fear and resentment that I couldn't see straight. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. Because of what happened, I've made some changes. I'm volunteering at a children's center, learning to see kids as the remarkable individuals they are, rather than as problems to be managed. I'm working on being the person I should have been on that flight. You'll probably grow up to be an amazing pilot. When you do, I hope you remember that flight, not because of what I did wrong, but because of what you did right. You showed more leadership, compassion, and strength at 9 years old than I showed in 15 years of my career. Thank you for teaching me that lesson, even though you shouldn't have had to. With sincere remorse. Diana Cole. Ethan read the letter 3 times, then carefully added it to the stack. His father found him sitting on his bed, surrounded by letters, with tears running down his face. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" "Yeah," Ethan said, wiping his eyes. "I'm good, I'm really good." Vincent sat down beside him, looking at the spread of correspondence. "Pretty overwhelming, huh?" "Dad, do you think people can really change?" "I think people can grow. I think they can learn from their mistakes and become better." "Why?" Ethan handed him Diana's letter. Vincent read it silently, his expression carefully neutral. "What do you think?" Ethan asked. "I think," Vincent said slowly, "that she's taking responsibility, and that's the first step toward real change. But it doesn't mean what she did was okay." "I know, but I hope she really does get better. I hope she learns to be nicer to kids." Vincent pulled his son into a side hug. "You've got such a good heart, Ethan. Don't ever lose that." 10 years later, Captain Ethan Cross, age 19, and the youngest pilot to ever be hired by Pacific Skyways Airlines, stood in the crew briefing room before his first official flight as first officer. His uniform was crisp, his silver wings gleamed on his chest, and his father, now a training captain, stood beside him with unconcealed pride. "Nervous?" Vincent asked. "Terrified," Ethan admitted with a grin, "but ready." As they walked through the terminal toward their aircraft, Ethan noticed the flight attendants doing their pre-flight check. The head flight attendant was a young woman named Sarah, fresh out of training, who greeted them with a bright smile. "Good morning, Captain Cross, First Officer Cross. Ready for a great flight?" "Absolutely," Ethan said warmly. Then unexpectedly he added, "Sarah, can I give you one piece of advice?" "Of course." "Every passenger on that plane, every single one, is trusting us with their lives, their time, and their dignity. The way you treat them matters. It matters more than you might think. Even a small kindness can change someone's entire day, and sometimes it can change their entire life." Sarah nodded, slightly confused by the intensity of his words, but moved by their sincerity. "I'll remember that, sir." As she walked away, Vincent looked at his son with understanding. "Still thinking about that flight?" "Every day," Ethan said quietly. "It taught me more about being a pilot than any textbook ever could. Because being a pilot isn't just about flying the plane. It's about honoring the trust people place in you. It's about dignity, yours and theirs." Vincent squeezed his son's shoulder. "Come on, First Officer Cross. Let's go fly." As they walked toward the aircraft, Ethan touched the wings on his chest, the same wings that had once been junior wings pinned to a 9-year-old boy's jacket on the worst flight of his life. That boy had learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's maintaining your dignity when someone tries to take it away. He'd learned that kindness is a choice, and so is cruelty. He'd learned that standing up for what's right sometimes means standing alone, until suddenly you're not alone anymore. And he'd learned that the sky doesn't care who you are or where you came from. It only cares how you fly. Ethan Cross stepped onto the flight deck of his aircraft, ready to begin his career. And somewhere in the passenger cabin behind him, 300 people settled into their seats, trusting that the crew up front would get them safely to their destination. That trust, Ethan knew, was sacred, and he would spend every flight of his career honoring it. If this story touched you, consider the power of kindness the next time you travel. Remember that flight crews and passengers alike are all human beings deserving of respect and dignity. One small act of compassion can ripple outward in ways you'll never see. And if you've ever been the child sitting alone, feeling small and invisible, know this: your dignity is yours. No one can take it unless you give it away. Keep your head up, keep your heart open, and keep flying toward your dreams. Clear skies ahead,